We could go around. Lauren wants a record of
Oh, it
this.
goes on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've forgotten that. As I try and take notes on everything. Just go around and maybe something that you did this weekend.
Oh,
Right there.
Right, the hot
Come
seat.
to the table.
hot seat.
oh, okay.
Michael Murray.
Oh, that's cool.
Right up
Betsy
front.
Griffith and President Cousins and worked. That's about it. Pat Rowland, I bought blueberries yesterday.
Ooh,
I'm
yes.
making jam.
Ooh,
We'll see.
yes.
What are the directions other than my name?
Your name, something you did this weekend.
Oh.
Beth Foley, and I babysat a 2-year-old
Oh.
and loved every second.
Is do they still smell the right way?
Yes. Well, I don't know, it depends.
Because 2-year-olds, I mean, like that baby
I know, that's what
smell.
I'm saying.
Yeah, I got to hold Red. We were at staff meeting.
Still smells like a baby.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Mary Ann's baby.
Kathy
Yeah.
Warren, I walk the dog.
Jackie Pollock, and I cut grass yesterday.
And you're back from somewhere, right?
New Hampshire.
Yes. Okay.
And Bruce Pollock, while she was cutting the grass, I was walking 18 holes of golf.
Okay, if y'all need marriage counseling later, just make
We're both doing what we like.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, amen.
Joan Liber, and I'm blessed to have 2 grandsons with me this summer. They got summer jobs at the beach, and today their parents are here, so I can be here.
Yay.
Oh.
Nick Blackerby.
Mhm.
I did a lot of cooking this week.
Ooh.
Janet Benray with Phil Swain, my husband. So it's Janet Benray Swain hyphen in between. We went bike riding early in the morning and
Oh.
I'm learning a new bike. So Phil is telling me not to coast so much. That's what we did.
But you just did, so you don't need to know anything more about it.
I'm Phil Smith. I'm a member of First Baptist Church here visiting you kind folks. Stacy invited me and I always enjoy the summer, read this book. Yesterday I went kayaking on Sloping Creek.
Ooh.
See anything new or surprising? Or?
No, I was kind of disappointed because their boys were not flying yesterday. Usually there's harriers going on.
Usually yesterday.
Jets down there.
Yeah.
It's quiet.
I'm Margaret Cooper, and I worked at the Newman Academy this weekend.
Yep.
Joel,
Mhm.
and I helped prepare food for a wine tasting that my sister gave us.
Nice.
I'm Elaine Burbrick, and I spent the weekend organizing my house.
Oh.
Fun.
I'm Anne Marie Lathan, and I'm a professional organizer, so I'm really excited. I spent the weekend, I have 2 kids home from camp, so I did camp lunch.
Something like internet.
Red, yeah, Red said the same thing.
Yep,
Frozen's like
frozen. You guys on pause?
yeah.
So are we.
Oh, here we go.
So Helen Robinson, I spent some time making friends with the bumblebees on my deck.
Maren.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to set up a hotspot. I hung out with Maggie Lathan yesterday. It was a blast.
Black, I relaxed a little bit yesterday.
It's good. Our internet, did I get, oh, here, sorry, no, I
Oh,
haven't,
okay.
oh, yeah, sorry.
Mike Murray took photos at the paddle battle down.
Yeah.
The what?
The paddle battle is a kayak race.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
I'm Dick Betts and I walked 9 holes on the golf course one day.
Yeah, yeah. I'm Kirsten Sandstegard, Dick Betts's wife, and I took the dog, we went to the farmer's market and then I took the dog to Lowe's, which is our dog's favorite store in the entire world. She gets petted, everybody makes a fuss over, and she gets a dog biscuit on the way out.
Darlene, did you, who else did I get ever, I mean,
I'm Darlene Wellman, and what am I supposed to talk about?
there's something you did this weekend.
This weekend. I'm ashamed to tell you, I completely wasted yesterday. My intention was to go to the beach first thing in the morning, woke up with cramps in my legs from a yoga thing. the day before. So I was getting home.
So you rested?
Dangerous. No, I fiddled around all day, but yeah, it was not what I intended. But yay.
Theologically, I'm not sure we'd call that a waste. I think, I mean.
Well, I talked on the telephone for quite a while.
Yes.
Yeah. Connected with friends. That's
Yes,
That sound like a waste.
Internet friends.
Might have to call
You have to
them,
call
might have to call them.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. The Molars are celebrating a birthday, I think. Oh,
Is she frozen?
oh, she might be.
His 1-year-old brother. Up in
Yay.
Mountains.
Oh, I love children's birthday parties. The Pauls, where are they?
Yeah.
There.
We are at the beach and we are celebrating our daughter's birthday this week at the beach.
Oh.
No longer a teenager.
No longer a teenager.
Oh.
Yeah, she will be 20 on Monday.
Okay, can you call him someone else?
Oh, yeah, so Corey.
Corey.
Can you hear us? Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I like one other made jam all weekend, and the berries are still plentiful and delicious.
Oh, yeah, that.
And Janet Bryan.
Mhm.
Good morning. Well, I have a son and his family next door, and they've gone on vacation. So as much as I miss my grandchildren, I have a little peace and quiet because they're in it all day. But I sent one grand cat home to Adam on Friday, and I'm keeping my grand cat and grand dog next door while they're gone. But I guess the nicest thing was I could take my walk whenever I wanted to yesterday. So.
And then
Terry and Charlotte.
Terry and Charlotte, something fun you did this weekend.
Well, you're muted, so don't be talking and thinking we can hear you.
No.
That might be.
They're working on it.
Okay, well, if you get there, yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah, just put it back in the refrigerator, please.
So the book that we, first off, thank you for letting me lead this. I love the concept of this class, and it was fun thinking of a book. I shared a book, Finding God in the Waves by Mike Mahar, that is a book that covers territory that I'm not necessarily familiar with or is not my experience. And so it's a book that challenged me because it speaks to a really different experience than what I have had. And there is a central story in this book. It is essentially the story of someone who loses their faith and then finds a different faith. He told the story originally on a podcast, his podcast, called The Liturgists. And I thought we might listen to it because it's interesting to hear him tell the story. So we're going to try this. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. I have the quotes and I can go forward.
It's going to be amazing. I don't know, we'll maybe do that. Okay. I'm gonna do this. Okay. This is probably it? Lost it now?
Serves Eucharist, and I'm feeling so cynical and jaded about it. And he starts talking about physics to introduce the Eucharist, and I'm like, what? Like, I've never heard someone say photon or quark in the context of the Eucharist. So good marketing. And so I listen. And then after his intro, he talks about how the final act of Christ was to wash the feet of his followers before the crucifixion. And that in doing so, he was setting them aside and making them sacred in the same way we set aside the bread and the wine. Really, I mean, it was a good intro.
Yeah.
Well composed. But he says, so if you don't know what to pray right now, just pray, how can I be broken and poured out for others like Christ was broken and poured out for me? And I thought, that's very nice sentiment. That sounds like humanism. So I super awkwardly, I've forgotten how to pray by now.
Yeah.
It felt weird. I bowed my head and felt very self-conscious. And I remember thinking, what do I do? How do you do this? So I literally just said, whispered, how can I be broken and poured out for others? And I didn't do the Jesus part.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is so manipulative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then people get up, and it's kind of a weird dynamic because a lot of these people really like Rob Bell's teaching. It's a big deal for them to get the Eucharist from him. So some people walk up and just take the Eucharist, and it's a sacred moment, but other people have their moment with Rob. And I'm like, this is strange. I don't know if I can do this. But finally I get up because there's a lull in the Eucharisting. And I start walking up to Rob. And as I start to walk up, Rob's eyes turn all red and teary. And I remember thinking that's strange. But as I'm thinking that, tears were running down my face. And I didn't even know that. My friend later told me that I had tears running down my face. That's how dissociated I was. And so I walk up, and Rob holds out this piece of bread. He says, Mike, this is the body of Christ broken for you. And there's a couple things I want to mention here. One is this is an act, the way the Eucharist is done, where this is a thing offered that you have to then take. They don't just drop it in your hands. They don't toss it to you. They hold it out and you take it. And I've had this moment of moral conviction because I was like, I can't take a piece of bread that represents a body I don't think existed. When you're wrestling with the idea of whether God is real or are past wrestling that, Jesus was just either an ordinary rabbi who was pumped up through a game of telephone or a myth. Without God, Jesus is just not very interesting. So I'd spent no time thinking about Jesus. I'd only thought about God. And so I was like, I can't take this bread. It's a piece of bread. And if I take this, I'm lying to all these people. They're going to feel like they've had this big moment where this atheist has become a Christian again. And they're going to go tell their friends. And I'm not that guy. And I'm not going to do it just for social pressure. So I actually went to turn and leave. And here's the part that's insane. This is crazy. It ruins the credibility of the story, but it happened, so I have to retell it. I heard a voice, and that voice said, I was here when you were 8, and I'm here now. Like, I lost it. I took the bread, I dipped it in the wine, I ate it, and I literally ran from the room. And I go to my hotel room, and it's a surfer hotel, so it's just like beds and a place to put surfboards. There's not even a desk. And I don't know why, but I wanted my journal, my notebook. So I get it, and I had this really nice pen I got in San Francisco. That's an odd detail in the story, but I really like that pen. And it's a Tombow. Anyway, so, and there's nowhere for me to write. And I don't even know what I'm going to write, but I know I need to write. And at this point in my life, it's not even like I was a writer. You know what I mean? So I just kind of wander around the back of the hotel because I'm so afraid to see anybody because I look crazy carrying a notebook and a pen and sobbing hysterically. And so I finally figured, well, enough time has passed. Surely all these people have left the conference. And there was a table right outside the venue. So I sort of sneak over, and there was nobody outside. I was like, score. So I sit down, And I open my notebook and I take my very fancy Japanese pen and I write, "Dear God, comma," like I'm writing a letter to God. And then I just start crying again. Like all this grief that I'd sort of like buried over losing God and my parents' collapsed marriage. It was all just this toxic sludge in my psyche. It's geysering out of me now. And I write a letter to God, and I can't read it as I write it because of the tears. I mean, it's as hard as I've ever cried in my life. And I close the notebook, and this Methodist pastor named Sarah comes out and sits with me and just holds me, welcomes me back. And I remember thinking, what do you mean welcome back? Welcome back to what? I don't know what happened. I don't know what's happening. I think I hallucinated. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just this automatic. There was no resolution. The Bible still seemed ridiculous.
Yeah.
I still thought the Jesus mythicists were pretty compelling. I just ate a piece of bread and had an auditory hallucination. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this is the uncut version, guys. So you don't get this part live. So I go out drinking with these pastors. And I realized, one, drinking pastors are awesome because everybody just has like a beer and nobody gets wasted.
Well, you
And-
get wasted on a beer though.
well, I can, but most people can't. And the other thing is when you have a large group of plain looking men in a bar who are not drinking very much but look like they're having a blast, that's like the most powerful evangelism possible because all these people are just attracted to you. And I remember all these amazing conversations with people who weren't in the club, they weren't Christians, but they felt this solidarity with us because they didn't feel judged by us. Really amazing stuff. And so they all have to like go to bed at some point because they got flights the next day. So it's like 2:30 in the morning and I don't feel like I can go to bed yet. I have that same 7-year-old unresolved feeling. It's back. So I walk down to the beach and it's dark. It's really dark. It's Laguna dark. So there's still like an LA light dome. But if you just came from the street, it seems very dark. And I remember not being able to see where the sky stopped and the ocean began. But I could hear the waves and I could see the surf when it was close to me. And I realized like all I could see was one of the most powerful forces on earth, but I could sense it but not see it. Like the Pacific Ocean. There's a lot of energy physically in the Pacific Ocean. So I thought as a metaphor for God goes, that's pretty good. So I on the spur of the moment decided to just start praying to God. And like it was a throwdown. I said, God, I don't know anything about you. I don't know if you wrote the Bible or if the Bible means anything. I don't know if you interact with the universe or not. I know that if you do interact with the universe and you have consciousness or will or agency, you got some explaining to do because my mom prayed that I would know you again, and a New York Times bestselling pastor gave me personal attention. And you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. And like literally right now, some mother in a war-torn country is praying that her children won't die, and her prayer is not getting answered. God, that's evil. I don't get it. It's ridiculous. So I can't tell you I'm gonna like follow the 10 Commandments and just pick up the Gospels and be what I was.
Yeah.
I can't say that to you. But who is it good to talk to you again? I don't ever want to not talk to you again, and I never want to feel like we're apart from each other again. So let's make a deal. I will devote my life to serving you, whatever that means. I will do everything in my power to make life on this planet better. I will study the Bible again and see what remnants of you I can find in its pages. All I know is that tonight I met Jesus again. And when I said Jesus, here's the second crazy part of the story. I was standing kind of high up on the beach, and the Pacific rushed forward and soaked me up to mid-calf and washed all the sand off my shoes. And I was reminded of Rob saying Christ's final act of service was washing the feet of his followers. And I remember very clearly, very vividly saying, is this really happening? And then the world fell away. It was the opposite of the trapdoor. It was like, I don't know if like when you were a kid, you would ever hide under the blankets, and if the blankets were stretched tight, you could see through to the other side a little bit, but it was hazy. Reality did that. And on the other side of this stretched veil is what I can only describe as the glory of God. And believe me, skeptics, I understand your confusion at that phrase.
That's where it stops.
Yeah, well, that's the meat of the, yes. So I grew up very Presbyterian. 6th generation of my family go to the same Presbyterian church in Charleston, South Carolina. Always a part of church. I was never apart from church. I mean, you heard me tell my story last week. Was it last week or week before? Where, college, I didn't always go to church, but I've always been a part of church, and I've always been a part of a very Presbyterian church where William Temple once said, next to a life of love, the human mind in the service of God is the most wonderful thing in all the world. So I've always been a part of a very cerebral kind of, this is how we love God with our minds. John Calvin in the 16th century wrote, now if it has pleased the Lord that we should be assisted in physics, logic, mathematics, and other arts and sciences, let us make free use of them, lest if we neglect to use the blessings therein freely offered to us by God, we suffer the just punishment of our negligence. So I have always been a Presbyterian who believed very passionately in science and in medicine, and that has never been a challenge. I did not grow up in an evangelical tradition. You went to church, that was what you did. It was very private. You didn't talk about those things. Doubt was never particularly something that was, you were allowed to have doubts. You were allowed to have questions. That's a very new thing in the Presbyterian Church. Last week, we heard about Ken Bailey and talking about historical context. And I shared, that's only in the last couple of centuries. Before then, you were supposed to take the Bible solely on its own. You weren't supposed to consider the context. It was just supposed to be very straightforward, one level, and that's it. So but it's a very new thing. And it's still a new thing for many Christians. That's still something that could be considered controversial. Now, I always knew there were other perspectives, evangelical perspectives, different perspectives, but just knowing intellectually there are different perspectives is different than feeling like you understand or you get a glimpse at that perspective. When I was in college, I read the book I, Rigoberto Menchú, and I don't know if any of you ever read, it's a story of a Guatemalan woman. And I have this very clear memory that was when it finally clicked with me that not everyone is born with the same horizon. That and I hope we all have those moments when you understand that some people exist in this world very differently than I did growing up as I did. So this is a book that sort of did that for me, helped me expand and see some different things, different experiences, different ways of being church. Evangelicals who saw things experientially, relationally. I came to this podcast. I don't even know how I really found this podcast. It's The Liturgists. Science Mike isn't a part of it anymore. In fact, I haven't listened to it terribly recently, but it's Mike Gungor, and Gungor is a very popular Christian music band. I mean, I've used some of their music in weddings, but it's nothing I'd ever listened to. That just wasn't my experience. I grew up singing in the choir, playing the organ. That's my music. So this is very, very different. And so that's one of the reasons I was very attracted to this podcast, because it really represents a very different experience that a lot of people have in the world. Mike talks about, he grew up in a very faithful, when he hears God say, when he hears his voice say, I was there when you were 8. That's when he accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. He says, I became a Christian when I was 7. My family comes from the largest denomination of the conservative evangelical movement, the Southern Baptist Convention. Southern Baptists believe that people become reconciled to God when they believe that Jesus is the Son of God, who died for the sins of all humankind, and when they state that belief in a prayer. He says, I'm thankful to report that my experience in a congregation was Jesus in your heart, Holy Spirit. It was a welcoming, loving, but then he came home from church one night and he felt restless, and he thought about it, and he went to his mom like in the middle of the night and said, I think I'm ready. And she said, and I told her it was time, that I was ready to know him. Mom asked a few questions and then led me in that sinner's prayer as we knelt beside my bed, an altar covered with Snoopy sheets. A few weeks later, my congregation baptized me, my teeth chattering in a baptismal pool with a broken heater. My feet didn't reach the bottom of the tank, so I dog paddled to the pastor and stood on his boot. Moments later, after I was dunked under the frosty surface in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, the preacher said I was a new creation, and I felt it. I was inspired and I couldn't wait to share the good news. So I didn't. The next day I went to school and told every one of my classmates that I loved them. Every one of them, every last boy and every girl, all of them so equally horrified by my pronouncements of love that I found myself in the principal's office. My faithful walk with Christ wasn't helping my social standing. But he talks about his faith does help him, that when he felt lonely hiding in the woods to escape bullies, he would talk to Jesus. I told him about feeling fat, slow, and stupid. Sometimes I would ask him why, if he truly made me. He'd made me the way he did. Other times I asked Jesus to make me able to hit a home run or run a mile without stopping, as I would imagine the admiration and accolades that would come from other kids when such a miracle happened. I didn't think it was too much to ask. Jesus was God after all, and God had parted a sea. Our talks weren't all lament and pleading. We had a lot of fun too. We talked about how the world worked and all the things in nature that amazed me. I didn't have any friends at school, but it was okay. My best friend lived in my heart. He then talks about he joins a band, he becomes very popular, but he meets someone that he falls in love with. And she goes to church. And so he says, I loved her. And so she's like, yells at him. And when he's in a band, he stays up till 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. But if he's not in church on Sunday morning, she yells at him. So the morning after my late night shows, Jenny would sit through worship service and stew in her anger while I slept at home. The first thing I'd experienced on Sunday morning was an angry call, or worse, a furious knocking on the front door. She was right to be angry. Every Saturday, I'd tell her I'd be at church on Sunday morning. I gave her a lot of lip service about being the most important person in my life, but what I really meant was that the person my emotions had the strongest response toward. If she was actually important to me, I would back that up by keeping my word. She told me if I wanted to be with her, I needed to be at church. If I couldn't come back to our church, she told me we would find a new one, but we had to go somewhere and we had to go together. I took Jenny's words and wishes to heart. So they get married. They go, he switches his life. They join this church. He becomes a deacon when he's 25, an honor I took seriously. 1 year later, we became parents to our first daughter, Madison, and her little sister, Macy, followed 2 years later. Although I was already a demonstrative person, becoming a father caused my heart to swell. Every day, I thanked God for my life and the people I got to spend it with. People are down on evangelicalism these days, but even my earliest years of life showed me that evangelical churches are great at doing a whole lot of important things. They provide community, comfort, and stability. When an active member of an evangelical church dies, the family of the departed receives immense support. Dealing with the influx of casseroles and baked hams delivered to the homes of the bereaved can become a logistical issue, and their grass is mowed as if by elves. What I'm saying is that it's easy to stand on the outside and dismiss evangelicals as crazy fundamentalists, but this misses most of what the movement really is, or at least is supposed to be. I'm not an evangelical anymore, but it was evangelicals who showed me how to be a loving husband and father. Evangelicals taught me how to be a good employee and how to live my life with integrity. And evangelicals were there for me when my life fell apart. His life begins to fall apart when his parents divorce after 30 years of marriage. And it begins this questioning of if this can happen. I mean, it's this very classic, I've done all the right things, so why is this happening? And more, he begins to question, and he goes back to the Bible and begins to ask questions of the Bible that he had never asked before. And he even at one point creates a spreadsheet. So I decided to start a spreadsheet on which I could track the verses that seemed to hold contradictions. It was just too arduous a process to stop and read apologetics every time I hit a passage that didn't line up in my mind. So, so the classic one for this is Genesis. You've got Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and they're different creation stories. When we read it theologically, we understand this, but if you come at the Bible with a more literalist point, how do you do that? So he begins to do this, and he begins to read different people. But then what happens is that his wife goes out of town. He begins watching some different things and reading some different things, and his faith begins to weaken. So he said, the morning after I read Pale Blue Dot, I spent most of my prayer time asking for insight, even pleading for a sign that God was real and could hear my prayers. I pray every morning. Prayer has been a part of my morning routine as far back as I can remember. Often I pray aloud. Somehow it makes God seem closer. So that morning I said these words, God, I don't know why I'm praying. You aren't even real. Two things happened immediately. First, the feeling I associated with the presence of God left me, like morning mist burned away by the heat of the sun. Second, I felt as if a trap door opened beneath me and I fell through it. A series of dark insights entered my mind with terrifying speed. I realized that all the people I had loved and who had died before me were gone forever. I'd never see them again. Because the only thing waiting on the other side of death was infinite blackness and the annihilation of self. There was no heaven, there was no hell. Beyond this life, there was nothing. Without God, life had no objective purpose. All those tough days I had pushed through believing that I served a higher purpose, that purpose was nothing but a comforting self-delusion. My life was meaningless. So were the lives of my children and every person I had ever loved or ever would. It didn't matter what kind of husband or father I was, because all my hard work would be erased when the sun exploded in 4 or 5 billion years. I felt a profound grief and inky black darkness as I realized there was neither mission nor redemption for humanity. The universe was indifferent to us. We were all just an accident. And the grief that sets in is tremendous. I think one of the reasons I began exploring some of this was sitting down with a scientist that was a member of the congregation I was serving at the time. And he was losing his faith. And he would just weep because his faith had been with him the whole time. But now he was seeing DNA evolve under a microscope, which I don't think you actually see the DNA. But he was seeing things that the scientific process happening and evolution happening that did not reconcile with the faith he'd grown up with. And it was devastating to him. And the fluffy answers I had about, well, science and faith are compatible simply didn't work for someone who was in the DNA. And literally that was his business. They were editing DNA. So fluffy answers didn't work. But then what happens? I told this, keep coming to church, questions are not a challenge for us in the Presbyterian Church. But for Mike, he's a part of this evangelical fundamentalist church. This is a very different experience for him. He actually is involved. He's in leadership of the church. His wife is a devout believer. So he was in an incredibly vulnerable position. To profess atheism would be social suicide. My community wouldn't tolerate it, and I would lose everything that mattered to me. Not because my friends were bad people, they weren't, but because that was the inevitable outcome of the evangelical belief system. The flock must be protected from the wolves. So I did the only thing I could do to stay in the flock. I put on sheep's clothing. I may not have been a Christian anymore, but I knew how to act like one. I'd have to lie, but that was a small price if it meant protecting my community and getting to hold on to the life I loved. I loved my church. I loved getting up on Sunday mornings and spending a couple of hours with warm, friendly people. These were the same people I shared life with throughout the week. They were the friends I met for lunch, the people I saw movies with. Their children were my children's playmates, but our church wasn't a social club. He also talks about how he lives with this fear that he might lead others away from faith. Even as he has fallen away, his great fear is that he will cause someone else to do the same. And I know that one of the things that I've wrestled with, and I am not a fan of the question, are you saved? I think it's the reverse. Instead of saying, are you saved? What we should be saying is, I want you to know how Jesus has affected my life. We should be sharing our good news, not interrogating someone else. But for someone who believes that your salvation is on their shoulders, that is an awful burden to bear. That is a really heavy burden to think that someone else's salvation rests on how you interact in a situation. So he continues on this and he continues exploring. And one of the interesting that happens is he goes on Reddit and he writes about this to seek some insight. And he finds that the atheists and the agnostics are really gracious. I was a Christian on the verge of atheism. And so I noticed a few trends. Atheists tended to be empathetic. Many told me that if faith kept me happy, I should keep on believing. I had expected a bunch of arguments against God, but what I got was shared humanity. The Christians were not as gracious as a group. Some were very kind and helpful, but most were vicious. They told me I would burn in hell, that I was going to destroy my family. They accused me of posting for fame and attention. Reading these posts 4 years later, I'm still surprised by the intensity of their anger. 2 years go by. And then his wife finally says something, says, you're different. What's going on? And he tells her, I'm just not sure I believe that God is real anymore. Bad idea. Her eyes went wide and her jaw dropped in a near comical look of surprise. She would have been less shocked if I'd slapped her. DEFCON 1, her cheeks flushed red and her eyes were bright as she replied, as only a Southern woman can, well, you'd better get right. There was a budding anger in her voice, sure, but something just powerful as well, fear. So she begins to evangelize him and to say all the reasons why he should believe. And he doesn't want to be rude. I mean, so he listens, he's not arguing because he's been through 2 years of this agony. But then the next day when the kids go to school, she turns to him and she says, I don't think we can be married anymore. And this is not, she's not petty. She's not small. This is a person who doesn't want to spend her life with someone she's not going to be in heaven with. I mean, this is a deep faith. And she says she'll keep a secret, but she does tell his mom. And so how does he say this? The only person I know who prays more than my mom is my grandmother, her mother. Somehow my mom reads her Bible 12 hours a day and prays 14 hours a day. My mom has the profound, unshakable assurance of someone who actually believes God is sovereign and cares about the minutiae of our lives. And so his mom at some point talks to him and spends hours with him, and he just listens because he doesn't want to, I don't want to hurt her faith. So he listens, and finally, she sort of just says, well, okay, you've got an answer for everything. She runs out of ammunition. She doesn't have anything else. And that's when he goes to this conference. Interestingly, he goes to this conference with Rob Bell because he's invited to a conference with NASA. And if someone who's interested in science, getting invited to a conference with NASA is like amazing. Interestingly, his wife and his mother both think this is what God has put on here and are pleased to let him go. But NASA is
Science.
Right. And so, and then the Rob Bell was after that. So they'd asked him to come to, he'd done some stuff with Rob Bell, but he didn't have to buy another plane ticket. He was already going to be in the area. Otherwise he would have said no to the Rob Bell.
I don't know who Rob Bell is.
Oh, that's the conference, the person who offers him communion.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Rob Bell is, how do you
Yeah.
describe Rob Bell?
He's like fairly influential post-evangelical, would you
Yes.
say, has written a lot. He did a series of videos that have been Numa videos have been very influential. He's kind of young hipster,
Yes.
but has written several. You may have, similar,
Yeah,
similar
but he
to-
wrote a very controversial book saying that hell doesn't exist.
Yeah, Love Wins. That
Love
Wins.
wins. And and he got kicked out of his church.
Yeah.
I mean, he was told that kind of belief is
He's
just,
a, he's a good he's an apologetics type of writer. So
yeah.
I got a couple books.
Yeah, I mean, no, yeah, I mean, he
He's
talks about.
he's a very engaging
He's
author.
very,
Yeah.
and so he's someone who's very well known, and that's when he has this moment where he hears this voice. And that too is something, I mean, I am a person that, I mean, I've talked a little bit about some of experiencing the presence of God, but more than anything, I've experienced seeing God in hindsight. And I've seen the threads and the patterns and I mean, I used to talk about when people said, tell me about your call, because that's a very popular thing to ask. I know when I was looking at seminaries and people would say, tell me about your call. And at that point, I didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, because I never got a phone call. I never got a fax. But I would, I mean, we want things to be that clear, and rarely is God that clear. I have worked on discernment and spiritual direction. And for me, that experience is rarely a billboard on the side of the road. It's learning and patterns and understanding how my mind and my heart work. And so that's how that's worked for me. So this kind of spiritual experience where you hear a voice or believe that the waves rose up is very different for me, but also one of the things that I found really appealing about this. So that's the first half of the book. Are there thoughts or questions? I don't know what we're doing on time.
You're doing great. Great.
Any?
Anna, it's Wendy.
Yes.
Was it Janet that was asking about Rob Bell?
It was Kirsten.
Yes.
Oh, Kirsten. We have a couple of his books in the library, if I'm not mistaken. And that Numa series that Maren was talking about, the youth group did that probably 10 or 15 years ago for probably a year or two. Plus the young adult married class did that with Whitney and somebody else for a good long period of time. It's actually an excellent series.
Yeah. Yes. So that's the first half of this book. And that's sort of how I came to this, because Mike, the Gungers, they both talk about how they have fallen away from faith, but then come back to faith. And for people, particularly like the Gungers who led, like, what do you do when your whole life is serving the church? And it's not only your spiritual life, it's your profession. What do you do when you have children and a spouse and all of a sudden you're not believing this? And the agony and the pain of not having what you've always had. And for me, I mean, I think for me, faith has always been, struggle isn't the right word, but I know people like, I mean, Ben has a solid faith like I'll never have. Mine is sort of a constant wrestling. And questioning and wondering. But there are a lot of people like Mike's wife, Jenny, or his mother, who it is just rocks. That's just not. And it's a spirit. I do believe that kind of faith is a spiritual gift that some people have, that kind of faith. Yes.
Could you tell us for just a minute a little bit about the author's scientific background?
Yes. So when he comes back to faith, what he does is like, I can't just do this accepting thing before. And so the second half of the book is coming again through science. So he studies neuroscience, and he looks at how prayer and meditation affect our brains, because he looks at some of the research and I mean, and you can find research on all sides of this, but he looks at some of the research that does talk about how prayer Here, let me see if I can find where he talks about that. What happens when we do pray, let's see. I'll find that in just a second. I think I went past it. So but he talks about how prayer and meditation does change our physiological. And so he approaches it through that. And he says, I don't know what we're going to call it, if you're going to call it prayer, if you're going to call it meditation, but it does change our physiological, what they can find scientifically. And that there are some things that aren't scientific. But one of the things that I found interesting through this is the challenge of this is that we tend to, in the church, we have followed a practice of God in the gaps, which is God in the gaps. So what we have historically done is God in the gaps is theology that lets God explain anything we don't understand. How did our moon come to be? God placed it there, which is wonderful until science hypothesizes and has evidence to support that the moon was formed during an impact between the Earth and another small planet about the size of Mars. The debris from this collision collected in an orbit around Earth to form the moon. So when we say, God is in what we don't understand, well, guess what? Science is moving so quickly that if we do that, we're going to have a crisis of faith. Because if we say God is in the DNA, well, then someone can go in and we can change DNA now. So that doesn't work anymore. So we have to let go of this and understand God in new ways. And it can't just be in what we don't understand, because with our modern world, there's a good chance we're going to start understanding it. So that's what he talks about, and his faith that he comes back with is very different. And he says, no longer am I just, it's not one thing. He says, I have atheist Mike and I have faithful Mike, and I've got to let them cohabit in the same body. And atheist Mike is going to continue to ask these challenging questions, and that these are not competitors. These are not battling. There are two things, and we can have both of them. And so the scientific research helps illumine how he understands. And so he understands the things that ping in our brains when we pray and how that is powerful. He understands that there are things that can't explain, when his daughter holds his hand and some of those connection points. Bonhoeffer in the 1930s said, religious people speak of God when human knowledge has come to an end or when human resources fail. In fact, it is always the God from the machine that they bring on the scene, either for the apparent solution of insoluble problems or as strength in human failure. It always seems to me we are trying anxiously in this way to reserve some place for God. I should like to speak of God not on the boundaries, but at the center, not in weakness, but in strength, and therefore not in death and guilt, but in man's life and goodness. So that, I think, is where he heads, that you can have the science and there will be places where they mesh and there'll be places where they don't. And it's okay to have those two streams that go. Peter Gomes, and there's a chance you'll hear this in a sermon at some point. He was writing about life on other planets, and he said, these are the kinds of questions that have always made Christians nervous. Rather than rejoicing in the possibility of the discovery of God's handiwork beyond our previous knowledge or imagination, Christians historically have worried literally about losing our alleged pride of place in the sun. Science has consistently managed to unmask one fundamental Christian heresy. Rather than placing God at the center of our universe, we have placed ourselves at the center of God's universe and determined that we are the objects of his existence rather than the subject. So that is, and quite frankly, I wish his book has shortcomings. He talks about the science and the neurosciences and the research that's done with prayer, with studying the Bible. He now does not approach the Bible as a science textbook. So there's this one anecdote where he's saying something and he talks about how the stars in the sky in the billions of years, and someone says, wait, the earth however many thousand years old. And so he no longer sort of even tries to make things fit into that. He acknowledges the billions of years, and he has this great passage where he talks about dust, and that we are, how we are dust and stardust. So that he understands that those both things exist and they're not in competition. So to not read the Bible as a science textbook. So yes, there are two stories of creation in Genesis. That doesn't have to be a contradiction. You don't have to find a contradiction. He also understands the importance of sometimes following God when you don't understand. I mean, he does not understand how he heard that voice. He does not know if it was a hallucination. Why the waves did. I mean, he does not and that's okay to have things that we don't explain. Mystery. Did any of y'all read the book Living the Bible? Is it Jacobs? AJ Jacobs, where he spends a year living the Bible.
Like literally.
Literally. I mean, it's a fun book to read. Rachel Held Evans does a similar thing. It's a fun book to read. But one of the things he concludes is that sometimes you follow the rules, not because you know why they are the way they are. You follow them because you learn something in following the rules. And I just love that, because how many of our, if you have teenagers, they're like, why? And sometimes you're like, just because it's good for you to learn how to follow things, not because this is going to be some grand lesson or I have some greater purpose. And so one of the things, so the things I have, that this book, which is not the perfect book, it's not the book that changed my life more than anything, but one of the things I really appreciate is it helps me understand the depths of someone who grows up in this evangelical world and how precious that faith is and what can happen when that breaks down. I mean, one of the things I've admired for such a long time about Presbyterians is that I will never hand you the car of faith that's all put together. You will have to put that car together yourself. And the reason that is that when it breaks down, you're going to know how to fix it. You're going to know how to put it together again because you've already done it. And sometimes when you're handed, this is what the Bible means, this is what it says, these are all the ramifications. What happens when that breaks apart, when your parents get divorced, when the cancer diagnosis comes? I mean, Kate Bowler has written quite beautifully about this. I don't know if y'all, Everything Happens for a Reason in Other Lies, I've been told. And she has a new book coming out that I'm looking forward to reading. Has anyone read Kate Bowler's stuff? And if you haven't read her book, she's done a couple of editorials for the New York Times that are just smashing. They're just wonderful. Yes. Oh yeah. And is funny and yes. So that's, in fact, I have something I'll read from her in a minute. Bromley McClanahan writes, in a long and short of evolution and the unfolding work of creation is that there are more complex and more mysterious than we are used to believing. The more theologically comfortable we can get with the notion of complexity and mystery, the more we might find not stumbling blocks to faith, but room to incorporate scientists' ever increasing understanding. And it's a fascinating field, science and faith. And there are scientists who talk quite beautifully about their faith. What I have learned is that fluffy things don't cut it when it comes to someone who's in the lab on a regular basis. And it's one of the shortcomings, I think, of being a Presbyterian pastor. I mean, honestly, I slept through a lot of my 8 a.m. biology classes in college because I was, but give me Shakespeare and I'm totally comfortable. I wish I'd taken more science because I want to take seriously the questions that pharmacologists are having with antibiotics. And now, I mean, I think we've danced around this a lot with COVID and the vaccine. What does that mean? And how are we interpreting that science? How is it faithful? How are we living out our faith in how we've handled COVID? And how do we care for one another when it's so different? When with the plague, the Christians were the ones who said, I'll go care for you. And that is our natural instinct to say, if you are sick, I will come care for you. When with COVID, we were told, you could make someone sick.
Mhm.
And and just how, what a turn. So we are going to love someone by staying home, and how hard that is. Not because we're willing to put ourselves, but we're not willing to sicken someone else. And I mean, as a pastor, that was what, would wake me up in a cold sweat, was that what if I unknowingly gave a parishioner COVID? What if, because you could give this without knowing you had it? And what if in the very act of being a pastor? And so what is faithful? And then with the vaccine, I mean, we're singing a hymn today. If you have one at 8:30, we're singing a hymn at 11. And we've crafted some language that says, if you're unvaccinated, you're welcome to make those decisions about wearing a mask. If you aren't vaccinated, we hope that you'll take that into consideration. How are we standing with the vulnerable, the kids who can't yet be vaccinated? We don't have perfect answers for these things. Delta is kind of messing with us a little bit. So, I think it still has some unfolding to do. So, yes.
Did his wife leave him?
No, they stayed married. I mean, she did. They did stay married. They are. And I mean, one of the most heartbreaking things he talked about, he led his daughter to Christ while he was not believing. And she was baptized, and sort of what that felt like. And just, I mean, my approach with my daughter was, you have to go to church, you've got to go to confirmation class, but then if you decide to join or not, that is your decision. That is not my decision. Clearly I have preferences, but it's a very different approach in the evangelical tradition. And to understand, I mean, also to understand some of the pain. I mean, they end up having to leave their church when he even when he does come back, because he comes back different. He comes back with these questions, and he talks about things. And if I can find that quickly, I will. Sorry, I only have like 27 pages of quotes from the book. This is the quote about prayer. These days, my intercessory prayers are an act of surrender, a way to voice my hopes and my hopelessness, my power to act and my powerlessness. When I pray for things I hope for, I am searching for ways I can act to make a situation better. When I pray in situations found hopeless, I'm searching for a redemptive perspective. And here, research throws a bone to intercessory prayer. Studies have shown that people who pray to God about problems in this way achieve a positive emotional effect, similar to if they'd seen a therapist. Prayer helps us grieve what we've lost, forgive those who hurt us, and maintain a positive outlook on life. Intercessory prayer is useful and beneficial in helping people surrender to and process their emotions and heal from trauma. So let's see if I can quickly find when he talks about, but he talks about that he does have to leave his church because he becomes LGBTQ. Yes, we've all heard about people who've been hurt by church officiants committing untoward acts. Those experiences are genuine and important, but my tale isn't one of them. There was no villain here. The people at my church loved me, and the tension I experienced there wasn't caused by a loss of love, but by disagreement. I was openly LGBTQ affirming, and my church saw same-sex relationships as a rebellion against God. I was an evolutionist, and some of our leaders saw that as an affront to God's authority. There was no way of denying it. Nothing about my theological views fit within the Baptist faith. My story of breaking up with my church is one in which both sides had the best of intentions. I was following a path toward who I believed God wanted me to be, and my church was being faithful in a way its members understood. But to stop fitting in at a church one loves can prove incredibly painful. And I think that, I mean, he talks about when he drives past the church, he still prays for the members. But they thought he was gonna, he would be in a Sunday school class and people call the church, say, I'm not comfortable being in this class with him. Because salvation was on the line. I mean, it's not, I don't like that shirt you're wearing. It's I'm concerned that this is gonna cause my child to go to hell. That's a really scary, it's very different from anything I have ever experienced. And so that's why, I mean, I found this to be, I mean, it's something because it's so different. It's different from what I've experienced. it's different from how I understand theologically. But it's also why I found it really important to listen to their podcasts and to experience. I've seen them speak at Wild Goose in Hot Springs, North Carolina. And so
Seems
that's,
so rigid.
yes, it is. But there's,
That is also very, I guess, very.
but there's freedom in that. And I don't want that. I have not chosen, I mean, I don't believe that's what God wants for me. But it's like a sonnet, there's freedom in those rules. And for people who are in evangelical or fundamentalist churches, there's it's safety. Like, do any of you like small, I love a small cozy room. That in the tight, or why babies love to be swaddled. In that, so people find safety and comfort in that. I think it's not what I believe, but I think I've become a better pastor by understanding people who come from traditions where there is trauma, but also he writes beautifully about this. And the ways for him, he sort of develops this two-way path with science and faith. Scientists will talk about the idea of having integration. That's not where he is quite, but that's because we are editing DNA and we might cure some pretty amazing things. The mRNA of the vaccine it was the result of decades of research that just came together in that one moment. Sorry.
Anna, what church does he end up going to?
I think it's a Methodist church.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, he names it. They're out in LA, and now he does all sorts of different things, marketing and different things. But talks about science quite a bit, and the neurons and the dust, and we are stardust, and to stardust we shall return.
I like this.
I know. That's
Stardust is better than dust.
that idea of the universe.
Dust.
Sorry, I didn't think I'd have enough to talk about. Is it okay? I know, aren't we ending up now?
We're this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I do want to give Wendy a chance to promote.
and then I have a little Kate Bowler blessing I want to read that she
very
posted
good.
yesterday.
Hey, Wendy, do you want to give a pitch for this is the last class is the next one, so. You're muted. I muted you, but I can.
Okay.
There you go.
So those of you who know me know that Timothy Keller is one of my favorite authors. He is a Presbyterian, but of a more evangelical sort than the denomination we're in. So, and we've done multiple of his books. The first one was The Reason for God, which is one of my all-time favorite books. But this one is called Hope in Times of Fear, the Resurrection and the Meaning of Easter. And I think the basic premise of the book is that evangelicals have such a focus on the cross and the crucifixion that a lot of what brings us hope as Christians gets lost. And he encourages us to look at Easter along with the crucifixion, but particularly focusing on the hope that comes to us because of Easter. And it's an excellent book written during COVID, during his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you guys next Sunday.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah.
All right.
So Kate Bowler occasionally writes blessings on some of her media posts. And so this is a blessing for being forced to rethink your life in God, a major rethinking of all that my life means. Help me, guide me. This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for ancient paths, ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Blessed are you who take the risk of standing still right at the point of change, through uncertainty and stress, wanting to propel you forward. Blessed are you standing there at this new crossroads, giving yourself permission to stay suspended a while in the questions. Maybe this isn't, maybe I don't want, maybe I need. Suspended in the reimagining, discerning until you find that the thought threads of what if lead you to a settled if then, and you know it's yours. Blessed are you, gathering what you need to move forward in this new awareness, this new peace. With deep truth comes a deep and settled calm. You'll know it when you see it.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. And if anyone, I mean, it's a quick read. It's an easy read. If anyone wants to borrow it, you're welcome to. It's one of those that I have on Kindle so I can highlight and export. Yeah.